So Space Marine 2 has been out for a little under a month, and I have nearly 100% the game and played over 100 hours of it already. It is the second most fun game I have played this entire year. The game taking the current top spot is a Balatro, which has consumed my life to such a degree that my Discord has a sticker that they spam every single time I load the game up. It's called Addict. I have played an absolutely enormous amount of Space Marine 2 in the time that it has been released, and I consider it to be a genuinely fantastic game to play, which might seem a little strange coming off of my prior review, which did appear to be much more negative on the title. Obviously, when a game launches, you have your initial opinions on it, and then over time, they tend to develop and bake at exactly 350 with the broiler on over the course of the first 100 hours of game time, especially for a title like this. It would be an understatement to say I have a lot of new things to talk about when it comes to Space Marine 2, not just after understanding its defined metagame, both for the PvE and PvP, but also the act of almost 100%ing the game outside of a couple annoying achievements. But I'd argue the most important part is clarifying some of my campaign criticisms that were, for lack of a better word, not expressed as fully as I would have liked them to be in the prior review. This will be a much more laid back video, as it's difficult to be overly passionate about thoughts on the metagame and stuff at 100 hours in, but more than anything, a lot of it is just discussion about all the aspects of the game and how they feel with this much time under the belt. And most importantly, where should it go from here? So let's go ahead and reiterate a bit a lot of the stuff revolving around the campaign. One of the main achievements is collecting all the data slates for this game, so I ran through most of the campaign again in order to pick up the ones that I missed. It gave me a really good opportunity to ruminate on all the things I said in my prior review. Now, if you watch that before you're watching this, you will know that I was very critical on the game's narrative specifically, almost overwhelmingly so. Now, I've been all over the place when it's come to this channel. It's insane to think that I was a major League of Legends content creator back in the day. But when I first started doing game reviews, so to speak, I specifically wanted to focus on positive reviews. Games I loved, either back in the day or new releases, and so I believe I got really good at expressing my passion for projects that I loved, but got very little practice at critiquing them. This is something I thought about for a while now, and I think it became very apparent in my Space Marine 2 video, because a large majority of the complaints that I gave were extrapolated wildly off base from what they intended to be. The review also spent too much time going over my negatives and far little time going over all of my positives, which is something I plan to correct later on in this video. It should be made clear, I'm still not a very big fan of this game's overall narrative and story. But when you put out a video, there will always be people who got the wrong information from what you were trying to say. It happens, it's the price of making content, some people just get the wrong idea. However, this time around, the wrong idea was extremely common, not just to the outsiders, but also to longtime fans of this channel who have seen a lot of my content over the past few years. And that's good data to have, because if those who know my content the best are not taking what I say the way I wanted to say it, then clearly it's not an issue with them, it's an issue in my delivery. And if there's any moral to the story of Space Marine 2, it's that self-reflection is a really good thing to do. So I feel in the interest of fixing my poor delivery, let me try to explain my points a little more in depth so there's no confusion. And then after that, let's talk about a lot of things I really loved about the campaign so we can put the scales back to where they're supposed to be. One of the biggest ones that definitely needs addressing is a compilation of why did blank happen. The main ones being, why is Calgar here? Why did Titus faint from the artifact from Graia? Why is Chiron's rage a plot beat that's never brought up again? A lot of these came off as very literal, as in like, why is Calgar here? when in reality, I meant to express this as more of a narrative concept. Space Marine 2 seems to be this weird mixture of game that gets new people into the world while simultaneously relying on you to already understand parts of the world and lore. The reason I took a lot of issue with Calgar is that despite us having a whole mission trying to contact him, and yes, he's brought up quite a bit, it feels like a whole lot of tell not show. He's talked about, he's clearly the chapter master of the Ultramarines, but if you're someone who has no understanding of the lore outside of Space Marine, he's given a serious amount of weight to his appearance at the end of the game, which only lasts maybe an hour. And if you're someone who just plays the game in general, you're probably thinking, who the hell is this guy? And why is he getting a slow-mo scene? And why haven't I seen him before? I feel that this is the biggest loss in translation between what I meant and what was presented, because almost every time I actually asked a question of why is X, that's normally in the fabric of the narrative and the story. I'm aware that Imara is trying to lure Calgar into the portal to get him killed, and that there's a good chance Calgar's either mental will or probably his iron halo on his back is what pushed him out of the time freeze. That's not an issue I have. I take issue with the idea that Calgar, chapter master of the Ultramarines, just throws caution to the wind, doesn't have any backup, and just marches his head first into what is presumably a warp portal. Don't get me wrong, he's a hard-headed asshole, but he's not stupid. Titus fainting from the artifact on Graia is something I completely understand, but definitely seemed like it was going to be set up as a narrative device. Whenever Titus is near the object, it has a debilitating effect that's going to be brought up more and more throughout the game, adding more suspicion to him in general, and also causing huge issues with him and his squad. But the fainting thing only happens once, and it seems like he's using the Primaris surgery as a misdirect to make sure nobody knows what's actually occurring. Much like with Chiron's rage issue and his entire history on Calth, it seemed like it was something that was going to be consistently utilized throughout the story, where I genuinely feel like it only had real impact for one mission. The biggest one that I'm actually a little surprised got misconstrued was the Rubric Marine speaking thing. Don't worry, I'm very aware that they can't speak. Ahriman is a bitch-ass motherfucker who turned my wife into dust. That's right, he took out his willy little sorcerer dick and turned my wife into dust. But for a faction so important like the Thousand Sons, the reveal just felt lacking, especially compared to what they did with the Tyranids, with that glorious opening cutscene with the Death Watch. I wanted some fanfare similar to that excellent opening, not for them to, just literally speak. The warp portal thing too, like I'm aware you can survive in the warp. Many chaos entities and other types of humans tend to do so, not just Drago, warp talons and so on. But hoofing your ass into a warp portal that is currently under the domain of a chaos sorcerer and apparently a literal lord of change, my first thought was, yeah, you're basically dead immediately because you've entered their domain. But apparently in a Q&A, the developer said that it was in fact a middle dimension created by Imara, so that does make it a hell of a lot more palatable in that case. There were a few side misunderstandings here and there as well. Like, I think some people thought I said I was listening to Horus Rising while playing the game as opposed to after, because I definitely didn't do it during the game. That would be insane, first playing a playthrough while listening to a totally different audiobook. I can't do Garvio Loken like that. Like, he's such a cool guy. But those are all besides the point. That feels like where a lot of this got lost in the sauce. 90% of my complaints aren't that they are not explained. They very much are, but so much of it is lacking the show don't tell. It's where a lot of my inner conflict comes from, because, I never want to yuck anyone's yum. It doesn't feel good to have this negative sentiment on the story when so many others seem to be enjoying it to such a degree. And I find that that's been so compounded because there was such strength in the individual beats of the story. But because those beats were individual, they fell flat for me. I would have loved to have seen Chiron's inner conflict with the traitors spread out over the course of the game so there could be a real strong resolution from it. I would have loved to have seen Calgar in the beginning of the game fighting alongside us and showing what a great character he is before maybe leaving or needing to be recalled, only to then come back and save the day at the end of the game. It would have so much more impact there. I would have loved to have seen Imara set up and shown the beginning of the game more, as opposed to just some graffiti on a Thunderhawk.
so we can really prepare for his reveal in a more exciting way. It's one of the reasons where I almost feel like there was some cut content from the campaign. I mean, these missions are very long and they spread a significant amount of areas with a ton of objectives. Hell, in the mission Severance, just this mission alone, you arrive to help the guardsmen after the Magos won't leave. You then do the entire Lictor boss fight in the swamp. Then there's the Flamethrower Ripper Swarm section, starting up all the generators, and then you get the jump pack mission after you make your way to the Down Thunderhawk. That all happens in a singular mission. And a lot of the missions are like that. And, you know, I kind of feel like at some point between those sections, there were more story beats that were supposed to be placed that either didn't make it in due to time constraints or, well, probably time constraints. That's where a lot of my initial negativity came from, because while so many people just want another big blue man kill Xenos game, I was really hoping for one to show the masses, the general audience, that no, Warhammer as a franchise is so much more than that. I had a Discord member send this post here, which I feel encapsulates it perfectly. There are two kinds of 40K books: Spaceman Shoot Bad Guys with Big Gun, and Meditations on the Dehumanizing Nature of War and the Futility of Mutual Kindness in the Face of Suffocating Oppression and Prejudice by Askrazov, the Child Flenser. I thought we might have gotten closer to child flensing levels of storytelling. I wasn't expecting full child flensing, but I thought we might be able to find a spot somewhere in between, because almost every single Warhammer game that has ever come out has been Spaceman Shoot Bad Guys with Big Gun, barring like 2 outliers. This felt like the time where we could show the world, no, it's more than just Big Gun. We have child flensing too. It felt so close because there were glimpses of child flensing in this game, but we never went full flensing territory. And that's just where a lot of my feelings come from. And I think in those expectations that I set up and those dashed hopes, I completely lost control of how I was expressing my critiques, and everything came out wrong. And that doubly feels bad too, because I really do like this game a lot. It is enormously fun. But what people sometimes forget is that a game can be some of the most fun you've ever had and still absolutely be a flawed product in a lot of ways. I can name a million 7 out of 10s that I think are the best times in gaming I've ever had, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's hilarious to me because I probably wouldn't be so critical if they had fewer story beats. They got rid of all that stuff and they just said, go nuts. I would have also preferred if those story beats that are currently in the game were more fleshed out, but we're in this funny middle zone where it could be dumbed down and be fantastic, or expanded upon and be fantastic. But because we're stuck in the middle, and granted I am a bit of a lore snob, well, here I am. Though with their statements on just making a bloody good time and my expectations setting me up for failure, it works out to segue into things that I should have done in my initial video. The thing that I should have talked about more, which is to gush about the positive things I really do like about this game's campaign, specifically before we move into the PvE and PvP modes. The Imperial Guard are represented phenomenally in this game, a beautiful mixture of the brass balls, gaunts, ghosts level of insanity that the guardsmen can put out, while also adding a great deal of, hey, these guys are basically just cannon fodder and not very strong of mind compared to the Space Marines. Almost every single mission has an amazing guard moment, either a faction that held the line against all odds, a giant company of tanks and chimeras rolling across, and a personal favorite near the end of the game when a lot of them are being screwed up by the warp portal on the other side of the planet. Some Cadians just pull their pants on, get their wheelbarrow for their giant brass nuts and say, nah, couldn't be me, and fight anyway. I got into 40K when I was around like 17 years old, took a bit of a hiatus during the early stages of my career, but when I got back into it during 8th edition, Imperial Guard was my army, and I've never been more proud to see them represented like this. The set pieces in this video game are, bar none, And that's another huge misinterpretation from my original video. So to specify, one of my issues was gameplay set pieces, lacking gameplay gimmicks. There's a reason why games like this often have a cool gameplay gimmick, why Halo has a warthog section and a tank driving section, and why Call of Duty has all those crazy first-person cinematic stuff, turret sections, driving sections. They help break up the gameplay. Now, the set pieces from a visual standpoint are breathtaking. Seeing the column of guardsmen in one of those missions over the bridge and just looking at the sheer wall of guns is astounding, as well as just the mass gargoyles and the sheer size of 40K and its pure splendor. You could take a picture from any frame at almost any part of this campaign, slap a little text on it and say, men will look at this and just say, hell yeah. And you know what? God damn it. Hell yeah. Powder that makes you say real. That's why I harped on the gameplay set pieces so much, because could you imagine if they had a little bit more of a breakup? Like when you're flying down through all the ships and just seeing everything break apart and showing off destroyed Imperial Navy vessels. Just imagine a set piece like that, but you get to drive a repulsor executioner or take control of one of the Skyfire turrets. It would be weird to have a playable dreadnought, obviously, but maybe we can ride on top of one and then just move the controls to us. It would have been so badass. Another thing that I liked is I actually really enjoyed Titus's arc in this game. And in a crazy roundabout way, I actually really liked how they did Leandros as well. Titus genuinely went through a long sequence of being extremely stubborn and keeping his stuff internal, and then realizing that he needs to express more trust into his squad mates, especially after being burned by that bitch Leandros in the first game. You know what? That's a genuine arc that was set up throughout the entire course of the game, and I think it's one of the reasons I liked it so much. Just like I said earlier, I felt most story beats were just a single beat, not over the long span of the campaign. Titus's was a long span, and it actually felt very well earned at the end. His speech in the dropship before you jump down, talking about how a squad mate questioned him and he admitted his faults, is real character growth. Leandros being a chaplain is also so on point. It's such a him thing to do, and actually makes me a little sad that we didn't get a chance to fight alongside him. I do feel like it is a little bit of a, oh, hey, by the way, this is Leandros, haha, at the end of the game, you know, soy jack pointing moment as I mentioned. But I also immediately thought how cool it would have been if we had fought alongside him in various missions, and that culminates in the reveal. You could even do it as like an accidental reveal in the midst of battle. Oh, his helmet gets shot off and it reveals it's Leandros the whole time. Oh my god, I've been fighting alongside him this entire time. It recontextualizes a lot of the conversations that would have been had. It would have been really fun. But despite that, I do like his position here, and I'm very curious to see where it goes. Much like in the original game, the villain is the one that steals the show every time they're on screen. Imura is a total baller, and his voice actor eats every line he ever gives. It's partially why I wish there was more of him, specifically when you're walking down into the Necron tomb complex and he's just constantly just shit-talking you, spouting out things like the Council of Nicaea is a bunch of grok shit and the Emperor is a massive liar. The internal Chaos fan in me was nodding my head the entire time, just thinking, fucking get him, that's right. As far as I'm concerned, Imura must have had a long and prosperous career as an administratum person working at an office job before he became a Thousand Sun, because that bitch is speaking facts. I'm really hoping that he's not actually dead and it's just some kind of Thousand Suns trickery, because the idea of a third game with Titus and Leandros teaming up to fight Imura once again, it would add so much. And lastly, this should really not go unstated, Warhammer is an extremely difficult genre to adapt, because it's naturally against all the things modern day people consider easy to digest. When you have to go out and say, hey everybody, humanity is entirely compromised of religious zealots with lobotomized slaves and serfs under a totalitarian dictatorship that outlaws AI, so they just put the brains of people they disagree with there instead. And then also, by the way, everything is a cathedral while also being a church, while also having a million candles, and they're still using parchment paper with the worst cable management you've ever seen. It's incredibly difficult to adapt, and I think this game might have done it the best. The only thing I have a bit of complaint complaint on is that the AdMech don't quite sound like I think they should, with the exception of the Archmagos, who sounds perfect, but that's a tiny nitpick compared to everything else. The visual splendor, the weight of the soundtrack when you can hear it, the environments, everything screams people who understood the source material well, outside of a few scalings, of course, but it's a video game, you can only go so far with that. Honestly, as I'm saying this out loud, I'm feeling the passion running through me again for why I love this universe, and it makes me remember why I normally only ever did positive reviews, because it's so fun to talk about this kind of game and how well they pulled this stuff off when it comes to all the things that make Warhammer. God, the Dreadnought throwing the statue at the Helldrake, the dude on top of the Baneblade, just the guardsmen in general, the visuals, the terror of the Tyranids. It's just, god damn.
I do hope that helps with some important context in explaining what I wanted to say about the campaign originally. I stand by my general feelings about the campaign's narrative. I do still think it's rather weak. But I feel that way a lot also because I know it could have been a lot better, because I saw the good parts out there on display that could have been blossomed into something really good. It's this weird contradiction where if you wanted to go full shoot man McKill mode, you could have just pulled those story beats out and I actually would have less things to critique. Or you could have gone the entire opposite direction and go hard into the narrative, and that would have been really satisfied. I don't need this game to be perfect to consider it a extremely enjoyable time, and considering I have over 100 hours and counting in under a month, especially with 2 conventions going on pulling me away from it, I do think it's an insanely good time. Now, let's segue and hop onto some other talks about late stage PvE.
So after a lot of time with the PvE under my belt, I've had a lot of interesting thoughts of it. This is going to get a bit more into the metagame of the PvE, as well as some of the more base thoughts involving it. For starters, the missions are all pretty darn good, if sometimes feeling a little bit long depending on which one you're doing. They all seem to be roughly the same time frame, but some missions definitely feel significantly longer than others do, and that generally depends on whether or not you're fighting the Thousand Suns. There are definitely a couple issues that need to be resolved to really flesh out PvE. The inclusion of benefits for doing a random mission is definitely one of them. However, I do wonder if that will actually change up how the players play this mode. I have completed a large amount of highest level difficulty missions, and the difference is pretty substantial depending on the enemy you fight. Fighting Tyranids at the highest level versus fighting the Thousand Suns at the highest level feels like the same thing it used to be back when Helldivers came out and people thought that fighting bots was basically going to Vietnam compared to the bugs. I genuinely think that the Nids are a substantially easier enemy than the Thousand Suns, and because of that, I do wonder if a random reward will even matter when it means you might have to fight the Thousand Suns at the highest difficulty. That said, once you lock in on the hardest mode, it isn't even really that difficult. This could be why they're adding a brand new difficulty in the roadmap later, because once you've got the right build and the right weapons, you can pretty much just face roll the first 2 missions with ease. The general act of playing PvE is still pretty fun. It's a bloody, gory time, and I do love that, especially when you play with friends. Now, every game is more fun with friends, but this one does kind of have the one where you can shoot the shit and have a conversation while doing your bloody, gory killing, and not just have to focus on heavily thinking about your build and the mission itself. But even when you do have to focus, it's not too crazy in terms of callouts. It's just kind of leaning forward in your chair a little bit, and besides that, my complaints for PvE are generally pretty small. I do think the leveling system is a bit strange, but not in the worst way. It's just strange to see such a linear progression system that doesn't really change much about your character as you get more perks because, well, you can only pick one of the 3. Because of that, a lot of your power is going to come from the weapons you level up, and when you think about it, getting higher in the level is more about increasing the power of your gear than it is your character. Though, I won't lie, it can be a bit annoying because if you're getting really high levels with a certain weapon, let's say my Melta rifle on my Vanguard, you'll have to probably go down a few levels in order to level up other weapons that aren't as high of a level, despite the fact that you are probably already kitted out and have already beaten higher ranks before. It reminds me of one of my complaints I had with the original Darkest Dungeon, that even though you are ready for high level stuff. Sometimes you just have to use a low level character and then go bring everyone into a much more boring mission with way fewer items and way less XP. Other than that, the only thing I really want is just a bit more content. 6 missions is not bad, but definitely getting a bit old, especially considering I'm mainly only seeing the first 2 often when I play, because those are the only ones that I can reliably go through, and the punishment for failure is so high that attempting the later missions on a high difficulty is just not worth it. So either there needs to be a really good reward for going random, or just more content in general, which luckily they are adding, so it could just be a waiting game at this point. Other than that, the only other thing that kind of hits me is some of the enemy scaling. I already harped on the Thousand Suns issues, but when it comes to the Tyranids, for example, there is such a difference between walking into a new area on the highest difficulty and fighting a Carnifex versus fighting a Neurothrope, and it seriously depends on your class. Sometimes 2 separate Zonethropes will be enough to team wipe you instantly if you don't have a sniper who has a las fusel with their name on it. This happens a lot with the Neurothropes. Any poor Bulwark mains are going to learn that lesson real quick, as all you have against that abomination is an empty plasma pistol and harsh language. It's kind of silly how hard the scaling can just turn on you like that. You make your way through enemy hordes feeling totally fine, playing I'm Still Standing in the background, killing all kinds of gaunts and warriors no problem, but then out of nowhere there's 2 Zonethropes, you don't have that much ammo, oh no, it's a Neurothrope, and your run is completely cooked. I feel the same way with the Thousand Suns Scarab Occult Terminator sometimes. You'll just be in the wrong spot, and those Hellfire missile racks will find their way to you, and that's the run. But then sometimes you're just firing on all cylinders, and it's easy stuff. Honestly, the best part of PvE is just being able to do it with the boys, having a good time, shooting the shit, murdering Xenos. That part they really succeeded on. Everything that this mode needs is apparently being added with the various updates coming soon, including the new enemies, new missions, new difficulty, and so on. So even though right now it's a bit lacking, Saber clearly seemed to agree, and so I think it's going to have a pretty prosperous life. I would like a more defined end game, something more to do with all of your armory data when that's all done, but from there on, I think we have a really solid game in our hands for a pretty decent amount of time. Throw some balancing changes, get some new content in there, a few more tweaks, and I'd love to see where it is in 6 months if they can do it properly. Lastly, I think it would be pretty good to discuss the biggest surprise of this game and really chat about what the PvP has been like after getting a lot of time with it. Of my 100 hours of Space Marine 2, I would argue about 50 of them, maybe more, have been on the game's PvP mode. It is astounding how good this mode has come out and how much I absolutely adore it. It's disgusting to me, not only how fun it is, but how good it can be with a coordinated team, and despite that, how balanced this mode is. For a game like this to launch in a state this well balanced is insanity to me, and the amount of depth they have expressed here has me wanting to make guide series again, just like the olden days, specifically for Space Marine PvP classes. It is that good. Let me gush about it even more. I know I'm already gushing about it a lot, but goddamn, every class has a point, and the fact that they stop you from having more than 2 on each team makes it so that even if a class is overpowered, it's harder to really suffer from it much because there are only so many. Almost every class feels like it's good. Some might feel like they're too strong, but I honestly can't always tell, because sure, the Vanguard seems like it can be disgustingly good with its stun ability, but without that stun ability, the heavies and bulwarks would just kind of ruin the game. The tactical scan, same thing, feels great denying areas and also making people take more damage, so lighting up again a heavy or a bulwark would keep them in check and then they wouldn't ruin the game. Every class feels like it has a genuine importance to it and they all work together. Playing as a bulwark with your buddy, as a heavy, properly blocking shots for them, knowing when to plant your flag when their iron halo is down, keeping comms open, and when your opponent swaps targets, you pull out the Blicky and you give them a few clickies. The assault class reminding us of the golden rule of game development, that gamers don't look up, and their ability to completely send people scattering by flying in the air, killing people with a pistol, throwing a grenade down, slamming on the floor. Oh, the sniper being an incredibly high damage class from range while also having a great cloak and dagger strategy with its SMG carbine or melee. It's wild how certain classes feel like they can counter other classes very well while simultaneously having other classes counter those classes, and yet almost none of them feel as if they can't win a 1v1 against another enemy. Sure, I would normally assume that a sniper would not be able to beat a vanguard, but vanguards are close range and snipers are long range. So in a sense, they probably can beat each other depending on which field they're fighting each other on. Tacticals can clearly beat out an assault in a 1v1, but if you're playing assault, you shouldn't be in a 1v1. You should be arriving in the asshole of the enemy, doing obscene things to it, because being in a 1v1 is not very Night Lords of you. It's time to pick on the weak, the surrounded, and the vulnerable. I'm not saying that development costs should be taken from other areas and put towards PvP, but I am saying that whatever they had planned originally for PvP, they should up it by like 50%. I don't think people realize how good this mode is, how fleshed out it is, how well balanced it is, and I think it needs consistent support because it is just that good. The only issues I run into right now are those of balance, but maybe not exactly the kind of balancing issues that I initially expected. I at first thought that the multi-meltas and the like with the heavy would just kill everyone instantly, but it's not as bad as I had initially thought. I was waiting to just lose my mind at a sniper sneaking up behind me and shooting me in the back of the head with the bolt carbine, like I have done so many times before, but even when someone was running that, it wasn't as bad as I thought. What I found out is the biggest issue is just the damn grenades. The grenades feel far too overtuned, at least for the first two grenades. The crack grenade does not appear to be too overpowered, and the melt-a-bomb does take a bit of finesse to use properly, but the frag grenade and the shock grenade I despise dealing with. The frag grenade can kill even a heavy at max health if you're close enough to it, and considering that this game has a very fast respawn timer and you spawn with the grenade back, sometimes it can just feel like you're getting pelted by grenade after grenade after grenade, and the sheer damage that frag grenades can do can be a bit ridiculous, and like by a little bit I mean infuriating. The shock grenade is a whole different breed of awful. This might be one of, if not the most overpowered flashbang style grenade I have seen in a video game. If you can think of a worse one, please let me know, but it is a flashbang mixed with a slow, mixed with an area of effect damaging feel that lasts over a long time. Visual stun, damage, lasts a while, AoE, slow, all in one grenade. One of these has to go. I'd argue it's the flashbang part. It's wild how many times you can get blinded by this grenade in quick succession because people will respawn, and because the spawn points are fixed, they will just yeet these things out immediately. Grenades in general, I just think need to be toned down, having the frag grenade do less damage and having the shock grenade have one of its functions removed. That is what I would say would be the best way to go about it, or they need to have a timer for it. Since you get a grenade every time you respawn, maybe having the grenade on, say, a 30-second cooldown might be a little bit easier. So when you respawn, you don't automatically get one, and you do need to wait to get it back. Besides that, once again, the only thing that I really want here is more content. 3 maps is kind of ridiculous. However, I will say the 3 maps are pretty good, so that does make me quite happy. The spawns are genuinely very bad, but at this point, the spawns are fixed, so the main issue is that they don't flip quick enough. It's very easy to just be there when the enemy respawns and kill them, which is very annoying and pretty BM, but what else are you going to do? The enemy is spawning there. So either there needs to be more spawn points or they need to flip a bit quicker. Also, of course, heretic customization would be incredible and is sorely needed considering that you play as them 50% of the time. It's just needing more maps, more game modes, more customization. If there's a broken class or broken combo, I can't quite see it yet, especially because you're limited to only 2 of them on a team and there are counters for almost every other class out there. The only thing that I really feel needs to be toned down are the grenades. Maybe a few weapon adjustments here and there wouldn't go amiss, but compared to the grenade spam, I think that's the main thing to be focused on. If I had anything else to say to the game, I would say just more ways to show off your prestige in general. So much of this game is the fashion aspect of it all, and I know it might seem a little zoomer of me to suggest this because every video game has some weird podium thing at the end of a match where they sell you a bunch of crappy battle pass emotes that you can use at the end of the game. I don't want them to sell that crap because you use it to fill up a battle pass, but I would like the ability to show myself off at the end of the game, either because of my really cool drip or just because I was that much of a gamer in a match. Don't really know if this is a thing they would add later on, maybe like an MVP thing showing off the player character at the end of the scoreboard. But once you're leveled up all the way to the top, you've unlocked all the weapons and you're just unlocking all the armor that you unlock also via the PvE mode. Well, you're basically done. They said that they're adding a prestige mode for PvE in 2025, but I honestly think that maybe the PvP one could use it a bit sooner, as I'm already nearing the top level, and it's kind of my own fault. I've been playing a lot of the game, but still. I've always been a big fan of showing off my prowess when it comes to video games, and I think especially in one where you are basically playing a Space Marine dress-up simulator, there should be more ways to do so. Unlocks are fun. It's always been fun to unlock, and the more you can unlock without spending money, the better. But yeah, the PvP mode is actually that good. If you haven't had a chance to try it because you're just not someone who enjoys PvP, I would still give it a shot regardless, just to see if this might be the one for you. It is pure 2010s multiplayer with all of its glory and shockingly few of its faults. It is like someone went back and copied all the best things of early multiplayer games and got rid of all of its problems. It's genuinely impressive how well this has turned out, and what's even better is that this is a shooter game in the 2020s that doesn't look like a tweaked out 14-year-old kid is doing movement tech on it. And god damn it, I love that. Also, it has persistent lobbies, so you don't rematch after a game. You just keep fighting the same enemies and you have the same teammates, and that's just amazing to see again. If they can find a way to make it so it's 6-person lobby instead of a 3-person lobby, that would be even better because we can get a big group. But until then, yeah, this shit rules. I want to conclude this video with a lot of little topics. This game is some of the most fun I have had this entire year, and it was a point that I should have made more clearly in that original review. I fully admit that my prior expectations and history with the Warhammer universe definitely clouded my initial playthrough of it, but I still stand by that I just don't consider its story to be anything more than mediocre. And that does suck, because the glimpses were absolutely there. There is something to be said about a game that is flawed but still incredibly fun to play. And thinking about that has gotten me thinking a bit more about myself, you know, my content in general. This last bit is gonna be a bit more, I don't know, personal stuff, so if you're here for the Space Marine, then this is a fine time to sign off. When I started making review content, I specifically chose things I was very passionate about, and that was a big part of why I did it, because I felt the online ecosphere of game discussion was absurdly negative. A game like God of War 4 would come out, and despite its massive success and appeal, it would get a 10th of the videos that would come out ragging on why Fallout 76 was the worst game ever made and caused societal collapse. Now, Fallout 76 absolutely needed to be ragged on, but it's unfortunate that the worst game at the time and the best game at the time had a massive disproportionate amount of videos. I saw fantastic games all around me going by the wayside because it was more important and, most importantly, more lucrative to talk about the bad ones. And I wanted to be someone who did the opposite. I even found issue in calling myself a game reviewer because I didn't consider myself to review things. I considered myself to be more like an appreciator, going back into the olden days of games I just loved and talked about how good they were and how fun they were. And if you look at the data across my channel of the last 4 years, yeah, that Warhammer Factions video came out 4.5 years ago. You'll find that almost all of the games that I was extremely positive about were in fact the videos that did the best. The Command and Conquer games, Kane's Wrath and Red Alert, Darkwood, Frostpunk, and the DLC, all the Warhammer content, the factions, the Space Marine Legions, Outer Wilds, Signalis, so on. There were some negative reviews that did also very well, the Call of Duty campaigns, the Rats exploit, the Battlefront things, but
those are low-hanging fruit, especially the Modern Warfare 3 one, where it's almost fun to just dogpile it specifically. But as I said in the opening of this video, a part of my brain was nagging at me as I moved to do more classic game reviews, which means a larger emphasis on the negatives and a lot more on criticisms. There was a little part of me that had wondered if this was the right call going forward. Especially with the last video, there was that little nagging bit before I uploaded that where I was like, is this not really what I want to do? Is this not the thing I was hoping to do? And seeing the feedback from fans of the channel over many years showed me that that nagging voice was indeed correct. As I'm talking in this part of the video, I'm already so much happier with how I feel about this video specifically because I felt so much more joy making it. And I think that's a sign. I have a second channel, if you're not familiar with it, and I often upload things like stream highlights and sometimes discussions or early impressions to games. I think in the spirit of keeping that positive, passionate note, I'm going to focus on products I have a real passion and excitement for, instead of just the new releases in general. And I'll instead talk about those new releases more and discuss the early impressions on them for the second channel specifically, keeping this one more optimistic and appreciative. I also might make that Space Marine 2 PvP class video series on the second channel because I really got that itch right now. But self-reflection is really good, and it feels exciting to go back to why I originally started to do this to begin with, to be a more positive force and to do something I'm much better at, which is talking about the things I love as opposed to critiquing things I don't. So I wanted to say thank you all very much for your feedback and especially the civility of it. The internet is so awash with hate and it feels like it's only getting worse sometimes, but the fact that my fan base was able to properly criticize better than I can apparently is a really heartwarming thing to see. Like, goddamn, I got a good fucking fan base, right? It's real heartwarming. So stick around, genuinely. I appreciate your time a ton. We have plenty of videos coming out before the end of the year, and they're gonna have a much different tune, I think. And it makes me really excited. So I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. And have a good one. Check out the second channel if you want more Bricky stuff and things. Thank you.